Welcome to Better Worlds Ocean, where we dive into discussions on cutting-edge technology, data-driven solutions, and groundbreaking innovations aimed at tackling oceanic challenges. Join us as we ride the crest of a new era in global sustainability and work together to preserve our oceans for generations to come.
Welcome back to the Better Worlds Ocean podcast series, where we dive into the latest data, innovation, and insights around making our oceans more sustainable and restoring our ocean health. Today, we're joined by Linzi Hawkin, who's with Protect Blue and a lot of other ocean projects that we'll get into over the course of this conversation. I'm really excited to have her with us today. And Linzi, where are you joining us from?
I am joining you from my tiny little cabin on a tiny little island called Jersey, which is sitting in the English Channel in between England and France.
Fantastic. For those of you ocean nerds out there, you may know Jersey. It has a special place in the world of ocean and maritime law, including special protections for its ocean resources. So maybe we'll touch on those a bit. But you're on a tiny island in Jersey, so you're surrounded by ocean. Tell us what first got you on this path to, as I think of it, kind of the creative director for the ocean. What got you into this work, and what got you thinking, here's the way I can bring my skills to work on the ocean?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been a squiggly path. Definitely hasn't been a linear one. I think, growing up on an island, learning to surf, kind of immersing yourself in all things ocean, it whether you like it or not, it kind of influences your life choices from a very early age. And I started working in surf schools and teaching surfing, and that was kind of my life for 6 or 7 years, like early kind of career. And then for a little while, I worked for the government in Jersey. So I worked for the Environment Department. My role was Education and Awareness Officer. So it was around building citizenship awareness programs around sustainability. But this is like in 2006, 2005, 2006. So like there wasn't a lot of awareness. There weren't that many things happening. It wasn't general discourse, like people weren't talking about sustainability or climate as we are now. So it was quite challenging. And I think at that age, I really thought that this was going to be the job that would like help me save the planet. And what happened was I got stuck into like a government job, and I was like, wow, there is no room for creativity here. It is very linear. It is very rigid. I'm not sure if this is where I'm going to make the biggest difference. And so I kind of pivoted out and explored all sorts of different things. I ran music festivals for a while, and actually almost used music festivals as a way to talk about sustainability and living in more sustainable ways. And then kind of landed in the space of education and creativity, finding different ways. I think a lot of what I've done is like, how can I find creative and innovative ways to talk about ocean, to engage people in good conversation, but in ways that I don't have to necessarily conform or align with like the rules. And so from an education standpoint, that's been almost building programs that don't necessarily sit in like regular school curriculum. So we're not constrained by having to tick a certain amount of boxes. And so that has sent me all around the world doing all sorts of crazy things. And similarly with the work that we do now, it's finding different ways to spark interesting conversations and to talk about sustainability and conservation in ways that maybe differ from other directions and more kind of traditional senses.
Yeah, I think when you and I met, we were at an event that Salesforce was hosting, a kind of innovation, innovation weekend, innovation
it was an ocean hack
fest. Yeah. And one of the things that you and your team brought were these images around the ocean as a beating heart, with the currents of the ocean connecting the world together and making these heart shapes. And I'm sad that those stickers are part of a laptop that I've since had to retire.
Oh, no.
But
I don't even know if I have any more. Otherwise, I'd send you more.
But I think that, speaks to the type of communication work that you were trying to do and building that educational curriculum around one of the earlier World Ocean Days as the work that you were doing then. And again, trying to speak to people through images as well as through co-creating ideas and kind of doing hackathons in the schools. So that's that kind of curriculum that you were talking about, like coming in different ways and creating these modules. And you're still doing
Yeah.
that kind of work, right?
Yeah, totally. So kind of building out, so like World Ocean Day for schools is probably the best and most relevant example because it's like smack bang on my calendar right now.
Right.
And so
World Ocean Day
finding
is
ways
June
to
8th, by the way, June 8th.
June 8th. I feel like for those of us who work in the ocean space, I always see June the 8th as like Christmas. It's like the most manic,
It is.
manic
It
run up to
is.
that day. But yeah, so that's a really good example of like how do we engage kids in meaningful conversations around the ocean, and how do we get schools bringing more blue into their day-to-day lives. And I think one of our challenges has always been expanding from just an ocean story to a water story. So last year that was a big focus of ours. So what we had noticed with World Ocean Day for schools is we got stacks of engagement from coastal schools and way less engagement from either urban or rural schools who weren't near the coast. And so it's been really fun year on year, kind of expanding and exploring like how else do we get more kids involved. And we worked on an event in 2021 for a UK brand called Finisterre, and we built out an ocean activist training camp for them. And we did a little bit of research before we started, and we put it out to their audience. They're quite a big brand, and we put it out to their audience of like, what are the biggest challenges for you in terms of becoming an ocean activist? And the number one response was, I don't live by the sea. So it's super interesting that people had almost written that off. They're like, well, I don't live by the coast, so that's not something I can help with. So we're trying to change that narrative.
Yeah, and I think it gets out there, but you do need to find ways for people to feel that connection. I worked with some of the groups that were involved in Open Data Day last year, where they decided to have a marine vertical in their work, where they were trying to get people to open up the data in their communities and in their local governments to create products around certain themes, one of which being climate and oceans. And a bunch of the more interesting products really came from people who didn't live by the ocean, including Tibet, where they were talking about visualizations and data about how the snow melt from the mountains eventually found its way down through the rivers into the ocean, right? So I think it's helping
Yeah.
people make those connections. And once they make them, then it all becomes, quite revealing to them in terms of ways that they might be able to kind of think of the ocean in their everyday actions, even if they don't see it every day, like you
Yeah,
do in
totally.
Jersey. It's right there.
Yeah. I think the other interesting thing, and one of the things we're working on at the moment is helping to build narrative around what a regenerative future can look like. I think especially in the ocean space, and a lot of the work we've done, less so now, it's more ocean and climate, but kind of even 2-3 years ago, it was so focused on plastic pollution. And what we noticed was so much of the storytelling was just showing how awful it is. And it is awful. That's the reality. But no one was showing like what it could be like. Like, this is what the future could look like if we all moved in this direction. And I still think it's the missing piece in climate comms. Like, not enough people are doing a good job of kind of reimagining this really aspirational future that we should all want to move towards, rather than this constant messaging about what we need to move away from. So that's kind of got us excited at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. And I am seeing movement in that way, not just with your group, but like Rebecca Solnit has a book out now about positive climate futures and how to stay hopeful and practice hope moving forward. And Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson has a book coming out soon, again, about like imagining futures, new ocean futures. And I agree, we have this critical decade to take action for the climate, and the ocean is such a central part of that. So, what kinds of projects besides that, the narrative creation, are you working on now where you are seeing people get those little hope sparks? What are people getting excited about? Maybe the surfboard people making surfboards out of seaweed?
I mean, it's a super interesting one, and kind of like seemingly random, but actually kind of an amazing story. So we've worked with an American NGO called Sustainable Surf for many years, and they're doing incredible work. And what they started doing was recognizing the power of surf culture, and how, within the media, just how much sway it has. And so they started kind of within their own circle of like surf industry, of how do we make the surf industry more sustainable. And so one of their major projects there is the Eco Board project. So it's about how boards are produced. And then they've gone on to build a secondary project, which has now kind of overtaken everything because it's so huge and amazing work, called Sea Trees, which is about restoring blue carbon ecosystems. So they're, planting mangroves, restoring kelp, doing huge kind of watershed projects. So we've worked with them for years, but this particular project came about during COVID. So no one was really traveling. And it was just so interesting because all our work with Sustainable Surf has been overseas, never at home. And it just so happened there was a young engineering student from Jersey who was experimenting with making surfboard blanks from seaweed. And so we connected with him. We ended up following his journey in figuring out how to make these surfboard blanks, which are typically made with super toxic materials, and connected him with another local shaper.
For our non-surfing listeners, what is a surfboard blank?
So a surfboard blank, imagine it's what a surfboard looks like before a surfboard shaper shapes it into a specific shape and puts glass on it and sprays it and all that kind of stuff. So it's basically polyurethane foam, and it's so toxic in terms of when you think of its life cycle, how they're disposed of, but also even really specifically for shapers. Like it's a horrible material. And so what's happening, and a lot of this is thanks to Sustainable Surf, is like there's a lot of innovation happening around, like people are starting to explore other materials, like how else might we make surfboards. And Charlie basically started playing with seaweed. Jersey has huge tides, so our tidal system goes up to like 40 feet tides. So what that means is as our low tide kind of kicks out, so often there will be an entire beach full of seaweed, and we have incredible ecosystems around us. And so we made a short film about his journey and what he's doing, and it's sparked a lot of interest. And I think it's less about, now we all need to make surfboards from seaweed, but more about there's innovation in your own backyard, and there are new ways of doing things and new materials that can be used and new collaborations that maybe hadn't seemed obvious at first, which is really interesting, I think.
Yeah, we should connect you with one of our other guests, Brian von Herzen at the Climate Foundation, who's doing marine permaculture and creating these giant seaweed grow farms. So then he could go straight from the seaweed production into surfboard production.
Yeah, I love Brian's work. We've spoken to him on a few projects that we've worked on, and it's connecting those dots, right? Of going, oh well, there's someone over here who's doing this, and there's excess material that these people over here might be able to use. And I think where you can, and that's quite often our role at Protect Blue is connecting those people and going, you need to speak to this person and let's make that happen, which is really cool.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because one of our goals with this podcast is to help people understand that there's always an opportunity to connect to the ocean, that whatever you're doing now, you can ocean it. You can find a pathway into the ocean. So as another person who's kind of created a freelance connector path, let's talk about what it's like. What's a typical day for you? How do you find projects, and how do you find those people you need to connect to? How do you balance kind of scanning the horizon all the time for what's new and what's next, between getting work done and, finding a way to execute on what you already have on your plate?
That's like the ultimate question. I think
it's a whole other podcast. Ocean work, how we get it done.
I think a turning point for us was when we made a commitment to only work in the ocean space. And it was a really scary decision, because commercially, so my partner and I, my side of things is strategy and education, and his is storytelling and creative. And so when we first started working together, we were like, oh, these skill sets match really well. And we can build out, in effect, a creative agency between our two skill sets. But when we first came together, we both had other freelance gigs going on. Some of them were connected to ocean, some were climate, but some were not. They were just more commercial. And so we made that call about almost 5 years ago. And, you make those decisions, and in that first year or so after you made the decision, you're like turning down quite a lot of work, and normally quite well paid work. And that's like, oh my gosh, was this the right thing to do? But that commitment and that consistency has really paid off, because what's happened is because we're so niche in what we do, we've become well known in that space. And so now I feel like I need to touch wood somewhere, but generally we don't have to do a lot of business development. A lot of work comes to us. We've built some really great relationships, and I think that's been a really big part of it, is like always trying to find ways to be helpful and generous and useful. And I think, showing up again and again, and whether that is, not always needing to have a benefit on our side. So it's like, no, this person just needs to meet this person, so well, let's make that happen. Or can we support this project pro bono because we think they're doing amazing work? And I think it pays off. And I think from like a day-to-day or an average day, I think, as I said before, in the run up to World Ocean Day, it's all slightly more hectic than normal because we're running that day for schools, and we're also the week after we're running World Refill Day. So that's another big digital kind of live stream event. But generally days, I try and eke out a couple of days with no calls. So I actually get time to do deep work, because without that, nothing really happens. But my side of the work is definitely more of the comms. So there's lots of conversations with lots of different people. And then in terms of looking for work, I think it's just everything for us is about relationships. So it's staying in communication with the right people, staying up to date with what's going on in the space, being willing to like pitch ideas to people, even if it's not a job. We're like, hey, we think this would be a really cool thing to do. What do you guys reckon? Like, I think we'd be very lucky. And I think now some of our ongoing relationships are clients that just come back to us again and again going, oh, we need this event to be run, or we need this film to be made. And the more we lean in and the more we narrow, the better things get for us, which sometimes feels a bit counterintuitive, but it seems to work.
Yeah, I think that spirit of kind of generosity and reciprocity, I mean, we could get very hippie about it and say, that's the way the ocean is, but it's also, I think it is a really nice part of working in this space, is that for the most part, everybody has that sense of that we need everybody. We need all hands.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can carve out your niche, you can make your business, but we all should be helping each other out, because there's just so much work that needs to get done, that let's help everybody get that work done. Let's all pitch in.
And it's really interesting. One of the things we're doing with World Ocean Day for Schools this year is helping kids understand the diversity of jobs available in the ocean space. So I know, when I was at school, if you said you wanted to work in the ocean space, you were told to become a marine biologist. That was it. That was the only track that you could go down. And if you couldn't do that, then there was no other option. And so it's like no one told me as a young person, like, oh, you're really good at these creative things over here, and you're really good at this thing, and you can smush that together and put it in the ocean space and it will really work. And so as much as possible, I always want to help young people understand that and recognize that we need everyone, and we need creative people. Gosh, we like really need creative people, but we need people in tech, we need science, we need everything. And recognizing, so often I meet people who, are maybe really good in a specific field. They might be an accountant, but they're so not fulfilled in their work. I'm like, take that skill and plug it into ocean, and all of a sudden you're probably going to feel really fulfilled,
Yeah. So what kinds of roles do you see? What are we going to need more of in the next 5 or 10 years? Like if this is a call out for everyone to jump in and do ocean work, what are you seeing as the needs? Where would you encourage people to get involved?
I would say we definitely need more comms people. I think there are a lot of incredible scientists out there who maybe aren't great at translating what they do into language that everyday folk understand. So for me, I never necessarily saw that as a skill that I had, but now I've understood. I'm like, oh, that's actually a really useful thing, to be able to read something complex and just translate it into plain English. And I almost used to downplay that, and now I'm like, no, that's useful. So we definitely need more people who can do that. We definitely need educators, people who, and when I say educators, I don't necessarily mean teachers in schools. It's like there are so many, one of the things we've done over the past few years is like look at people who are connecting with others with blue experiences. So maybe it's like a water sports teacher, maybe it's someone who takes people wild swimming, and find those avenues and those people of like, can you talk about protecting and conserving the ocean whilst you take people out on these experiences. I've always found that really interesting because from my experience, you know, the moment, you know, someone catches their first wave, it's like this hugely amazing, energetic moment. And if you can match that with a conversation about protecting the ocean, it's going to be far more impactful than a lesson in a classroom, you know? So it's like, there are different ways of educating. And even back to my like music festival days, it's like, yeah, like we need people to apply this messaging in ways that reach different audiences, because one of the things that I notice a lot is like we can be stuck in a fairly solid like echo chamber in the work that we do and preaching to people who already know and who are already doing the work. But it's like we need to get this out beyond us, you know? And so I think for me, comms, education, creativity, and finding ways to bring people in. And I think going back to that idea of, you know, helping envision and imagine a better future. And that needs that playful, creative, imaginative way of thinking. And I think so often people don't associate that with a career in ocean, but we need it desperately, you know? So that's where I would say the help is required.
And I think even if we go back to early career Linzi, when you were working in that government space and feeling kind of constrained and constricted, things have changed. And there are a lot of people in government agencies, in politics, who are trying to think creatively. And I think there is more space for people to do that work. So if you're listening to this and you work for the government, you too can be an ocean creative and find ways to communicate your work better. And we need you for that too. So there is room, like you said, for everyone to help tell the stories of what's needed and what could be in the ocean in the next 20, 30 years. So any other things you want to share with us today or encourage people to do with World Ocean Day coming up?
I mean, I think it's just recognizing the importance of our connection to our blue spaces. It doesn't matter if your blue space is a river or a stream or a lake. It doesn't, you know, there's a connection all the way through to the ocean. And, you know, I think there's I'm definitely not going to be able to remember it off the top of my head, but there's a beautiful quote that we reference a lot around you know, making sure that you spend time outside, you know, and that it's not enough to just preserve the land. You have to actually get out and enjoy it. And I think that can be forgotten. I think we can forget it even in our own space, is that we can we can get so caught up in the work and the hustle and the urgency of what we're doing that we can forget to just go and be in nature and remember that connection. The quote is Edward Abbey, and I will find it and I will email it to you. But I absolutely love it, and it's a quote that I use again and again. And the ending is brilliant because it's about, you know, outliving the bastards who are stuck to their desks, you know. And so as much as possible, the work we do, we try and just get people outside and just get them having those experiences, because that's where I think real change happens. And whether that is doing that through events or through our work or just remembering to do it ourselves, it's what brings us back to what's important. And so, yeah, my invitation is like this World Ocean Day, go find your blue space and just spend some time there, you know, and remember your connection to it. And I think that in itself is a really good catalyst.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today. And thanks to everyone listening. Get outside and find yourself some blue, even if it's just the blue sky, because the ocean helps make the climate, it helps make the world livable. So almost anything you look at outside in the world is part of the ocean in some way or another. So thanks for helping us remember that, Linzi, and we'll see you on the next podcast.